Congresswoman Gwen Moore says Congress needs to unite to protect dreamers from what she calls an un-American agenda from the Trump administration.
Congresswoman Moore joining us this morning on 4-1 Forward. Thank you for being with us. What do you see is necessary in order to make this happen in less than 2 weeks for DACA and DREAMA recipients?
I'm really happy that you raised the point that it's 2 weeks, but it's not really 2 working weeks. The week coming up, Republicans are going to go on their annual retreat. Week after that, Democrats are going on their annual Democratic retreat. And so really there are only a couple of days left to do something. It's going to require compromise on both sides, quite frankly. Not only is the president asking for his wall and $25 billion for his wall, but I think that he wants to foreclose on opportunities for legal immigration, for family reunification, for diversity visas, and Democrats find themselves in a situation where, or dreamers find themselves in a situation where they're hostage to a lot of these demands. So it's going to require some compromise on both sides.
So let's talk about some numbers. When we talk about dreamers in Wisconsin, we're talking what, less than 7,000 in our state? Around that number, and then across the country, 800,000 is a number I'm hearing, but in the president's proposal, he's saying it could reach out to 2 million. When you look at compromise, first of all, this is a change for the president. The president's saying he's now looking at a road to amnesty or to get the DACA recipients in. Do you believe him?
There's a little bit of a trust deficit.
Yeah.
I can tell you that no one knows. I mean, I think Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, they've all said that they don't know what to expect. Chuck Schumer has characterized negotiating with him like negotiating with Jell-O. And so I do think that it's smart for both houses to try to come up with some legislation and put it in front of him to sign. Dare him not to sign it, else we may be able to override him.
But what seems concerning in the conversation is, are we talking about dreamers? Are we talking about immigration for all?
Sure,
because right when we were talking at the shutdown of the government, there was some information that was sent out by the White House that made it seem that we must protect our borders and immigration is not an easy issue that we can handle. But dreamers don't have felonies, they don't have misdemeanors, and that story is not being told, I think, when we balance the wall and protecting America with people who want the opportunity that we all have been given here in America.
That's well said, Shannon, because we're not just talking about dreamers, we're talking about their parents and other folks that didn't apply for DACA protection, but we're also talking about diversity visas. We're talking about those S-hole countries that the president referenced, and you know, the demand that in exchange for providing a path for dreamers that we may have to foreclose. The president is talking about foreclosing on illegal immigration. And so those are very dicey issues.
So you say dicey issues. Do you say then let's get a clean bill for DACA, let's just deal with DACA, that's what's in front of you, and then try to tackle immigration down the road?
You know, that makes perfect sense when you consider that we only have 2-3 legislative days between now and February 8th, the next shutdown day. So some of us were very frustrated with just kicking the can down the road, because the keeping the government open is an entirely different issue with many substantive issues besides immigration. We're looking at a budget with the sequester caps that Republicans themselves admit is unsustainable to run our country. And Republicans in the House, at least, only want to raise the caps and spending for defense and don't want to do it for those other issues that are so vital for our community. I mean, keeping our community health centers open. I mean, paying forward, as Susan Collins has said, to keep the Affordable Care Act premium stable. Transportation issue, big talk about infrastructure, but there's no money. We gave $1.5 trillion to corporations and to wealthy individuals, and so it's really tough to talk about actually passing a budget when there's no money.
So what should your constituents do? What should people in Wisconsin do as we approach the February 8th deadline so that if the bucket gets kicked down again, they can hold their politicians accountable?
Well, I think that the Senate vote really demonstrated a reliance on Mitch McConnell keeping his word, that he's actually going to put a DREAM Act provision or immigration proposal on the floor. Now, that doesn't guarantee that anything will happen in the House. This is a different animal completely. But I think people should, all eyes are on the Senate and what happens by February 8th.
Speaker Ryan indicating he does like where the president is on this position, where he's come to. So do you see hope in the House that they can play along here?
You said Paul likes what has happened?
With the speaker, with what the president laid out.
Well, you know, Paul should share that with the rest of us, because none of the rest of us knows what the president has laid out. But if he likes the contours of what we've heard, then he's looking at, you know, barring certain S-hole country folk from coming in. And by the way, African immigrants, you know, tend to be very highly educated.
As well as Haitians.
Haitians,
And I
skilled.
think when I was referring to Speaker Ryan, he was talking about this proposal for Dreamers.
Right. Well, we need to settle this.
Okay.
I've met Dreamers, and they are very, very anxious.
Sure.
And they have contributed so much.
Welcome back. No one knows the challenges people on welfare face better than Congresswoman Gwen Moore. She's been there and done that.
She's been an advocate for those who need it the most, pushing for a bill called the Rise Out of Poverty Act. You have faced the welfare reform issue as a state lawmaker. You once called on Governor Thompson, his reform, as the Frankenstein experiment on welfare reform. What is your concerns when you hear Paul Ryan speak of revamping social welfare?
I'm just terrified. I served on the budget committee when then chairman of the budget committee, Paul Ryan, was chair for almost 10 years. So I know almost chapter and verse what he intends to do. He has long saw the provisions under the Social Security Act, not just the small little piece that we call welfare, but Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and SNAP, formerly called food stamps, as driving the deficit. And he has really vowed to curtail these programs and to cut them as much as possible. So we've seen we've seen proposals from him over the years to decimate these programs. And so what he hopes to do this time is to, you know, like block grant Medicaid, take it away from its entitlement status to, you know, first come, first serve, and when the money's gone, that's it. He still wants to turn Medicare into a voucher. But more importantly, as it comes to so-called welfare, we have seen here this administration wanting to allow states to drug test recipients for Medicaid benefits, perhaps for food stamps, and to do work requirements for low-income people who would otherwise be eligible for these programs.
You have had time, even under President Obama, to work through some of these issues on poverty and welfare reform. Do you see any common ground that can address the issues that concern you?
Well, I can tell you that I'm making a really big push for the next session to be on the Ways and Means Committee. It's a tax writing committee, but under its jurisdiction are the so-called welfare programs, including, you know, Social Security and TANF, the predecessor to AFDC. And so I'll be front and center on helping to shape these programs. I think there's areas of compromise.
Where?
I'll give you one big example. Paul Ryan and I have consistently agreed that support payments to low-income parents ought to go directly to the parent, the custodial parent, instead of going off to pay for back Medicaid bills or to pay admin costs for administering the program. That's one area of agreement. But I do think that there's going to be major battle around requiring Medicaid recipients to work, for example.
Can I ask you, you know, the conversation, especially from the president and this administration, has been the middle class and making America great by looking at the middle class. Why do you believe that the low-income worker is not a part of this conversation when it comes to making America great again?
Thank you so much for raising that, Shannon. Because when you stop and think about it, those people who who voted for President Trump, many of them in rural Wisconsin, maybe in West Virginia, other places, these are people who need these services more than anyone. They need Medicaid. When you're poor, not having health care is just yet another catastrophic problem that you face, especially if you become ill. And you may become ill as a result of being impoverished. You know, if they're going to require you to work, think about it. There may not be any jobs available with your skill sets, a skill set mismatch. You may be needed at home to care for other people. And the vagaries of poverty may mean that you are unable to maintain regular employment. And so all this does is reduce the caseload. The court battle that's occurring in Kentucky right now.
Sure.
I mean, they just admit that the reason that they want to do it is they want to save $300 million.
So we just have a few seconds, but do you think there should be a work component?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Bottom
that was
line,
straight.
Right, right.
All right.
The objectives of the Medicaid program is to provide health insurance for low-income, poor people.
All right.
All right.
We're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you, Congresswoman Gwen
Hey,
Moore.
thanks for having me.